Guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and today I'm bringing you my November wrap-up. So November was an interesting month for reading for a couple of reasons. The main one being that I sort of put everything a little bit on the back burner, reading, blogging, videos, everything, so that I could do NaNoWriMo. So if you don't know what NaNoWriMo is, it is National Novel Writing Month. Everyone has their own kind of goals, but the sort of main one that I think most people do is to try to write 50,000 words in 1 month, in 30 days. I did not do that. I wrote about 22,000 words instead, but I learned a lot about myself and writing and all of that in that month. That's another video for another time. Another thing that happened was that if you have seen some of my monthly wrap-ups lately, you may know that I've been kind of like teetering on the edge of this really weird reading slump where I'm like kind of almost over it and then I fall back down. I like can't claw my way out of this. So it's just not been great. I haven't really been able to sort of recapture my like burning love of reading every day. I have read 108 books so far this year, and it is December 2nd. So I think that that has something to do with it. I think I might be just a little bit burnt out, but I'm going to continue to try reading and all that, but it means that I just didn't read that much this month. The other thing that impacted my reading is the fact that Let's Go Eevee came out this month. So Simon the Eevee and I have been having wonderful adventures and really ignoring my TBR pile. And if you don't know what Let's Go Eevee is, it's one of the 2 versions of the new Pokemon game that came out for Nintendo Switch. I am not a huge video game person, but the things that I love passionately, and Pokemon's kind of like my #1 thing. So I have 5 books that I read this month. I have a few physical books, I have an ebook, and I also have an audiobook that I read. So I'm going to go ahead and get started because this is kind of a weird mix of things. I liked most everything that I read. A few things took me by surprise. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'll let you decide. But it was a really interesting month for books. I feel like sort of my reading slump is showing a little bit here in the types of books that I read. So the very first book that I read is actually one of my most anticipated books of 2019. It came out in November, and I love this author. He's one of my favorite authors ever. I was a little bit nervous about this book, but I ended up absolutely loving it. I should have never doubted him. This is Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. I love Brandon Sanderson so much. He, as I said, is one of my favorite authors, but I love his adult books. I don't love his YA books. And when I heard that Skyward was coming out, I heard it was going to be his first full-length sci-fi novel, because he writes primarily fantasy. So I was super excited about that. I also heard that it was going to be a YA novel, which made me a little bit more nervous. But I should never doubt the Sanderson, because the Sanderson is amazing, and this just proves that he's one of the best in the business right now. Skyward takes place on a world in which humans have crash landed on, and they kind of ended up being forced to colonize the tunnels underneath the surface of the planet. They've not been able to get off, they can't fix their ship. It's been many generations since there was the crash. However, they have begun to develop some technology and have begun to build starfighters. So one of the reasons they had to build these fighting ships is because they are constantly under attack by these creatures called the Krell. No one has ever seen the Krell before. However, Krell ships come and bombard and try to wipe out the human civilization periodically. So there are pilots who fly in these starfighters, and they have to protect the human colony. Our main character, Spence's father, is one such pilot, but when the book opens, it is his last battle, because during the fighting, he turns tail and runs. He is a coward, and he is branded as a coward, and his family has this black mark against them in this colony. Now, this is troublesome because Spencer wants to become a pilot, and she desperately wants to be admitted into flight school. She has the brains, she has the passion, however, she has this sort of mark against her because of her father's cowardice. She ends up getting the chance to get into flight school, and this book is all about her learning how to fly, learning how to fight, but also learning what really happened to her father, and a few other things on the side. I loved this book so much. There's something about this. It gives you such a nostalgic feeling, even though it's not a nostalgic book. It's not based on anything, it's not, you know, a retelling of anything, but there's something about it that really sort of like just fills you with wonder. So what I was thinking when I was reading this book is that it made me feel the way I did when I was 8 or 9 years old. My family first got cable television and I discovered Star Trek, the original series, for the first time. This is kind of the first time that I've recaptured the feeling of watching those old episodes and having this absolute feeling of wonder. And this is what, to me, sci-fi should do, and it was just perfect. I have a feeling that this is going to be a book that people either love or don't really connect with because Spensa is a tough character. In a lot of ways, she's the classic Sanderson female lead. If you've read any of his books, you probably have a good idea of what that means. She's super sassy and spunky, and she, thinks she can do anything, and she's very weird. She's not just quirky, she's very weird, which I absolutely loved. But she's really headstrong. She is really sort of annoyingly self-confident. And she really gets her ass handed to her when she does enter into flight school. And I really loved seeing a character get humbled in that way and have to build themselves back up again. I thought that was done incredibly, incredibly well, and I ended up really loving Spensa as a character. My favorite character in this book is a character named Mbot, who I won't say anything about, but if you do read it, there's going to be no surprise that Mbot is going to be most people's favorite character. That's all I'm going to say. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. I'm sure you can probably figure that out. I just thought it was so much fun. I absolutely loved it. I whizzed through it really quickly, even though it's like 500 pages long, and I could not recommend this more highly. It's a great gateway into sci-fi if you are interested in reading sci-fi but haven't read anything before. But I think that a lot of people who love sci-fi already are going to really enjoy this one. The next book that I have is another Fairy Loot book. This was for August, maybe? I'm a little bit behind, but I'm working on it. I had a little bit of trouble getting into this book initially, which is not the fault of the book. It's this reading something that's been happening, but once I buckled down and really got into the world, I really ended up enjoying this. This is Mirage, and this is by Sumaya Daoud. So this book is a debut novel. It is a Moroccan-based fantasy, and it is a science fiction and fantasy novel, which I love because I feel like you so rarely see the two genres combined. This book follows a character named Amani, and Amani is a girl who lives in sort of a very impoverished community on a sort of unimportant moon, and her people have been conquered by the Vathic Empire. So one day she is celebrating her kind of coming of age. All the girls in the village who are the same age are having this huge celebration, and she ends up getting kidnapped by the Vathic because it turns out that Amani bears a startling resemblance to Merim, who is the incredibly cruel princess, the heir to the throne, and Amani is going to be forced to be her body double in order to protect her. Amani doesn't want this at all. Amani hates these people that have beaten her people down, have taken over, and hurt and killed so many people, and so she is in a really, really terrible situation. However, she knows her life depends on her ability to mimic the princess. I love these kinds of books. I think they're so fun, the kind of like body double type books. I haven't read many of them, but I'm really glad that I ended up getting to read this because this is definitely a trope that I really like. I think that Mirage was one of my favorite books in terms of world building this year. If you want to read some beautiful, absolutely beautiful world building, this is definitely a book to pick up. I loved it. I loved the culture and sort of the colors and the food and everything that you get from this book. She manages to convey so incredibly well. I liked Amani a lot. She's interesting because she is simultaneously angry and kind, and she's a very nice person. But these all balance each other out really, really well, and I did not find her to be a kind of boring character like you sometimes get with the very kind YA heroines. I thought that she was just fantastic and really, really well written. I had a little bit of trouble with the romance in this book for a couple of reasons. The main one being that I just didn't really believe it. I liked Idris, who's the love interest, well enough, but you don't really get to know him very well. He feels a little bit flat, and so therefore I couldn't imagine him being such a compelling, interesting, intriguing character for her to fall in love with. The thing that stands out the most, you may note that Idris is in fact the fiancé of Princess Marim, who is identical to Amani. I can't think of a situation in which that would work well. I feel like that's maybe a little bit more complicated than was portrayed in this book. Yeah, that's just a little bit tough for me, and I felt like that wasn't necessarily dealt with in a way that was as complex as maybe the situation called for. I gave Mirage 4 out of 5 stars. I really, really enjoyed this book, and I have a feeling that the next book is going to be explosive. I'm really looking forward to that, and I'm hoping we get a little bit more character building for Idris as well. The next book that I read this month is one that I actually read digitally, and I don't have a copy to show off here, but there's a link to the book below if you want to see it, you want to see the cover and check it out. This is one that really took me by surprise. Didn't really know what to expect coming into it, and I was pretty much blown away. And I've been struggling a lot with thrillers lately because they're just not living up to my expectations. But this one surpassed my expectations. I really loved it. This is The Hunting Party. This is by Lucy Foley. Hunting Party takes place in the northernmost reaches of Scotland at this huge hunting lodge. And there's a group of, I believe, about 8 friends from Oxford who are coming together every New Year's Eve, and they have this big party. So this year they are having it at this hunting lodge. The book opens with one of the guests having been murdered. And of course we have to figure out who the murderer is and all of that, but we also have to figure out who was murdered. We don't know who was murdered, and I think that was the thing that was so cleverly done and really pulled me into the story. Everyone in this book is a shitty person. Everyone is a bad person, and I love those kinds of books so much. They're hard to pull off because when everyone sucks, you don't really have anyone to root for, but you kind of love everyone anyway, and I thought that it was just so incredibly well done. I'm not going to say too much about this because thrillers, you can't really say anything without spoiling anything, but I would so highly recommend this. I believe it's out in the UK in ebook format, however it will be out in physical format in January of next year by HarperCollins, so definitely check it out. I thought that it was just fantastic. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was actually another thriller, and this one was a funny one for me because it is so insanely hyped. So hyped, and they're really putting a lot of effort behind this one, and I think that the hype from the publisher rather than from readers is kind of what ruined it for me. This is The Silent Patient, and this is by Alex Michaelides. This comes out in February of 2019 from Orion in the UK. So this is a really interesting one because you may have seen a lot of marketing for this. There are tons of proofs that are going out. There's a whole campaign that's going out. And I think that the way it's being marketed maybe I don't think it's misleading. I think that my own expectations sort of got in the way here. Because it is getting all of this crazy hype, I expected it to be a sort of genre-defining, groundbreaking thriller, and I don't think it was. It was a decent thriller, it was a good thriller, but I don't think it's anything spectacular. This book follows a man named Theo, and he is a forensic psychotherapist, and he is sort of obsessed with this case that happened 5 years ago. A woman named Alicia, who is a very well-established and celebrated painter, one day shot her beloved husband 5 times and then never spoke again. So she's never spoken about the murder. No one knows what happened. No one knows what her motivation is. They just know that she is guilty as sin, but they don't know what happened. And he becomes obsessed with this case. He wants to find out why Alicia killed her husband, who she had reportedly a great marriage with. This is an interesting one because I feel like complaining about it being a book that has a lot of sort of standard thriller tropes is dumb because it's a thriller. But I think that it was just my expectations that got in the way. The twists and turns were fine, but as I was reading them, I was like, that's interesting, rather than like, say, when I read Gone Girl, where I was like freaking out. It was just kind of okay. It was just kind of there. I don't really know how to explain my feelings for this one. It was fine. It was fine. I did have a little bit of a problem with the character of Alicia and the way that she was portrayed, because she's definitely, to me, comes across as one of those sort of empty vessel type characters for the male characters around her to interact with. And I feel like Alicia was just like super hot and killed her husband. And that was about it. Which is hard because she doesn't speak. She doesn't speak through the entire book. I don't know. I think that it just didn't necessarily work for me. I think that my expectations got in the way. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. The very last book that I have on this list is my audiobook for the month, and it was fantastic. I was so happy to finally read this book. This is Warbreaker, and this is by Brandon Sanderson. So it's another Brandon Sanderson book that I read this month. I have had this on my TBR for ages. I had a US copy when I lived in the States that I got rid of, and then I bought it again when I moved to the UK, and it's been years and I've never read it. And having read it, I'm wondering why it took me so long, because I loved this book. This is like everything that I want from fantasy. And I didn't even realize it, because I'm at the point with Brandon Sanderson books where I just don't read the back. I'm like, yep, please give that one to me. I will read it. So I don't know. I should have read this ages ago. I'm a little bit disappointed in myself. This book follows two sisters who happen to be princesses. This is indeed a princess novel. So exciting. And we have our older sister named Vivenna, and Vivenna is training her entire life to become the wife of a man called the God King. He's the most powerful man. He's got this incredible magical ability, and he is the king of the rival nation. And she's been preparing her entire life to become the wife of the God King. It's part of a treaty that's brought peace, and when the day comes for her to be sent, her father decides to send her younger sister instead, which her father gets like worst father of the year award because he just doesn't like her little sister very much, and he loves Vivenna so much. So Ciri, the youngest, goes instead, and Ciri is a very headstrong young woman, and she is not necessarily who you would imagine would be the best fit to become the God King's wife. I know that Warbreaker is not necessarily the favorite book for a lot of Sanderson fans, but I really loved it for a couple of reasons. The first one, of course, being sister power. Amazing. We have two incredibly cool sisters, and they love each other so much even though they don't necessarily understand each other. That love is there, and it's girl power, and I love books that have sisters in them, and I love books that have sisters with good relationships in them, so I was so happy about that. The thing that I found the most interesting about it is that although Sanderson is really well known for his incredibly intricate magic systems, and this is an intricate magic system. It has to do with breath and color, and it's very cool but complicated. But I feel like the magic almost took a back seat to the plot, which you don't always get, especially when you do have cool systems. I feel like this was much more about politics and political maneuvering and trying to prevent a war from happening than it was about magic, which for me was really, really interesting because I feel like that's not necessarily something that you see from Brandon Sanderson. There are a lot of characters in this book, but our main characters, of course, are Vivenna and Ciri. Ciri is very much the classic, as I mentioned before, Sanderson character. She's super witty and smart, and she's cute, and she's quirky, and she's fun. She's great. I like her. Vivenna was amazing because she is a woman who has had literally her life purpose torn away from her, and she has to rebuild. And it wasn't a choice that she made, it was a choice someone else made for her. And so she decides to take charge of her life. And I loved that. I loved her story so much. And she is incredibly sheltered. She does some stupid stuff, but it's totally understandable. And she ends up having such a good heart and wanting to do the right thing in such a great way. I thought that Vivenna was great. She's now my second favorite Sanderson character after Yasna. So there we go. I gave this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really, really love this. The audiobook is excellent. The narrator is very, very good. And I now understand why people say to read this before you read Words of Radiance, which is the second book in the Stormlight Archive series, because of basically a throwaway line, but it's an awesome throwaway line. So I would highly recommend picking this one up first. It's not necessary, but you will understand things a little bit better, perhaps. I'll say that. So those are the 5 books that I read in the month of November. It wasn't a hugely busy reading month for me, but I did end up doing a lot of stuff, like writing a book. So in the comments below, let me know not only if you did NaNoWriMo, tell me how did you do, but also let me know what you read in the month of November. Also, if you read any of these books, I'd love to hear what you thought. I post bookish content to this channel fairly frequently, so hit subscribe, check back soon, and I will see you next time.